Hi, friends. I am joined virtually today from Sundance by composer and producer and multi talented person, Simon Taufique. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Simon, thank you for joining me today. I know we're going to be speaking about a film that you are presenting at Sundance this year, Riki by Rashad Frett. But for folks that haven't been familiar with your work, you are a producer, you're a composer. Can you maybe explain to us how you started your career in the film business?
Sure. I started out totally by accident. I was studying at NYU political science and economics with the hope that I could work in foreign service and help make a difference. And I was writing songs in that is my passion. I was just doing it as a hobby, never thinking that I could turn music into a career. But
Mhm.
along the way, while I was studying at NYU, I was introduced to a fellow brown student, South Asian student, who was studying film at NYU's Tisch Undergraduate School of Film, and so we became fast buddies. And he would take me to his film classes and his film sets. These were
Mhm.
all short films and low budget stuff, and I got a glimpse of how films were made. And along the way, his career started to blossom. And when he had a chance to do a feature studio film, he asked me to write a song for the film. He did have a composer, so I was just writing an extra piece of music. It didn't end up in the movie, but I was really blown away by the level of collaboration, how inspiring it was to be around filmmakers and the teams of people that they bring to the table. So it turns out that that film student became M. Night Shyamalan, and he directed The Sixth Sense and other wonderful films. And so that was just a an accidental friendship that turned into him showing me a different world that I
Mhm.
didn't know was even possible. And so that started me to write music and treat it more seriously. And then at some point, I ended up being asked to write music for a film. And that turned into a successful project. I didn't know what I was doing, but I did have a sense of what story needed and how music could help that. And then once I was working on films, these were primarily independent films
Right.
by a lot of newcomers. And so they were still figuring out how to make film, produce film. I started to offer my help. And I had some experience in the startup world, having been a tech founder. And doing a lot of the same kinds of things that producers would do, which is raising money,
Right.
uh, really activating and inspiring your teams, bringing in partners, coming up with strategies for marketing and distribution, a lot of the same things that you do on a film. And so once I started to help out these filmmakers, when they were making their follow-up films, they would come to me earlier in the process and ask, "Hey, can you write music for my film? But could you also actually do some producing as well?" And so that was a wonderful entree into the world of producing, again, by accident. But
Right.
by then, I had enough exposure to the mechanisms and the machinery that goes around uh, filmmaking, but also the creative spark and how to work with these filmmakers on a creative level.
Excellent. I love these like stories about happy accidents and great friendships.
Right.
Were you also trained in music prior to like in earlier life or?
Not at all. I'm self-taught, and so lot of the music that uh, I've written has been the product of really following story and
Mhm.
my how I'm feeling in the moment. I learned how to play drums first, and I did that by joining the marching band
Mm.
in junior high school, and so I learned very early on about the power of rhythm. And
Yes.
so that has permeated so much of the music that I write. Piano being a percussive instrument, guitar, you can also treat that as a percussive instrument. So that's just been one of those happy accidents, and being around other musicians and learning by playing with them and collaborating with them, and really honing my ear more than my musical theory abilities, and that has been a very a good skill to have, because so much of film music is about communicating a feeling.
Yes.
And sometimes you can do that with fewer notes than more.
Hmm.
And that idea of collaborating also means that what I lack in formal music training, I'm able to supplement by collaborating with other composers and musicians who are far more skilled and knowledgeable about music than I am. I mean, I've been very fortunate to work with Julian Casablancas of the Strokes, David Torn, who works very closely with Carter Burwell. I mean, these are people who will forget more about music than I'll ever learn.
Right.
So I'm very grateful to be working with geniuses like that.
For sure. Would you consider yourself someone who also is a bit of a cinephile?
Absolutely. That's again something that I learned by being alongside M. Night Shyamalan is that I
Hmm.
was able to cultivate uh, a taste and a an appreciation for film simply by talking to him about what kind of films he was being inspired by as he was figuring it out. So he would just talk aloud about his theories and his impressions of different films. And so a regular practice for us was to hang out at his place and watch director's commentary or those wonderful special features on Blu-rays when Blu-rays were around.
Hmm.
So again, really a happy accident of not really studying it formally, but through osmosis, being that sponge in the room of soaking in how other people are experiencing film, and then going to film festivals and just trying to soak up as much about film as I can by watching and then asking questions.
That's so great, and so relatable. I feel like a lot of us who kind of gravitate to this world somehow is because we admire something about the art. Um, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. Then and there's obviously so much about the art that comes from the storyteller and the story that they're telling resonating with something that we relate to in their story. And the deeper you go into character, the more you're going to find there's a world of cinema and art films that don't get mired in the limitations of a timeline or worrying about how is this going to do in the marketplace when their focus is how am I telling this character story? And the more you get into character, the more we get into seeing ourselves in that character.
Right.
Not that I'm against blockbuster movies. I'm happy to work on them when they will appear in my future.
Yes.
But but at the same time, my favorite films are those where I get lost in a character's experience and feeling.
Right. Yeah. No, and I understand what you mean. We can have our popcorn movies, but we also have our really deep and poignant films to balance us out.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned you've worked with a lot of emerging filmmakers and short films, and in this case, you are at Sundance with Ricky, and Ricky is now both. It started as a
Right.
short and a feature. You've been involved in both stages. How did you approach? Were you also a producer on both of
Yes.
the formats? Okay. So how do you normally approach a short that beautifully evolves into a feature?
Well, it's a rare feat for a short film to evolve into a feature, but it is something that I'm always hoping for because I do think that you develop a shorthand with the collaborators, with the filmmakers, with the teams that you have in making that short film. I'm a big fan of leveraging those relationships to be able to go deeper and to do more and not have to just reinvent the wheel by learning how to work with someone new. Although working with someone new is also a very exciting experience and it pushes you further. But in the case of Ricky, the team that made the short was very much this tight knit family,
Right.
and so retaining as much of that spirit as possible was important in making the feature. Because it is the story about a family. It is the story about what happens to those around us when one of us ends up being uh, punished or punished you know it, too much for mistakes that we've made and in the case of Ricky, he makes a mistake as a 15-year-old and
Yes.
that follows him through the rest of his life and it follows his family, and so that sense of family is what uh, I witnessed on the short film, and then tried to work with the filmmakers to bring that family spirit into the feature film, and it really made a difference.
For sure. And my understanding is from doing some research is that you normally come in earlier as soon as you can when it comes to
Right,
a film, right? And
right.
and what's that
So yeah,
dialogue like?
sorry about that.
No, sorry. I was asking what's that experience like, the dialogue in the early stages and then you being able to create your music.
Right. So getting onto the film early on, ideally at the script stage, starts the creative process. So you start thinking about how can I help tell this story through music, and you have the luxury of time to make mistakes and to try out a lot of different paths that might not be 100% in the direction that it needs to go, but maybe there's one idea or one instrument or one melody that can be carried over into where your final score is going to end up. And the earlier you start, the more time you have to make the bad music so that you can get to the good music.
Right. And would you say that there are, I mean, I don't know how your studio is set up, but do you tend to, you mentioned percussion, do you tend to always start with the beat or what you're feeling in terms of the images that you're getting from the film?
That's a really good point. There is a rhythm that you can start to feel as you watch a film or go from scene to scene, and it can be the pacing of the film or of the characters and the plot, or it could be the pacing and rhythm of how the film is edited. So getting on early also means that you get a sense of how quickly am I reading through the script? Is it this fast-paced, frenetic experience, or is it something that's evolving slowly over time, where you're learning more and more about this character as they experience new things? And you can get that sensibility from reading the script and then seeing early cuts of the film. You can get a sense of, okay, this is we are racing towards the finish, or it's a slow build. There, we're
Right.
ramping up to something that something big that might be happening. Yeah, there is a rhythm to it. I tend to write uh, with a pulse or a silent rhythm, and with melodies that are either playing with the beat or actually against the beat, so that there's a sense of push and pull. But again, it depends on uh, the the tone of the film that it's trying to create, or the energy of the actors. And
Right.
you can get actors who are just so serene, and they are almost like a painting moving over time, or there are these characters who they're a blur, and they just move like lasers through the film, and you have to struggle really hard to capture them. And so the music can be that sense of uh, constant movement. So you get the sense from studying how this story is unfolding, and also how the character is interacting with the story.
Fascinating. Just to be a fly on the wall would be interesting.
Oh,
And,
I often will think back to how certain cues or scenes of music come together, and it's such a blur, and I almost wish I could go back and watch how that happened, because once you get into the zone, either on your own or with the filmmaker, and you come up with something that you didn't expect or you didn't think was possible, and you want to go back and say, how did we come up with that? That was such an inspired moment. I want to dissect it, but when it happens like that, it's you're just holding on for dear
for
life.
sure, for sure, for sure. And also depends on timing and turnaround and all of those things too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? So you in both of these, like the short and feature version of Ricky, I'm curious because what is that dialogue, or how do you navigate these two roles of you're working on music, but you're also assisting as producer, and when do you put one hat on and take the other on, and
Yeah. Well, I think the reality is that you never end up taking both hats off. They're always on. So even when I'm producing, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about what sound am I hearing in my head as we're filming this scene.
Hmm.
Even though in that moment I'm on set as a producer, but I am thinking musically, but not in a conscious way of I have to write music, this kind of music for this scene.
Right.
I'm really just getting impressions of what is the energy of this performance that this actor is bringing. What does this scene feel like? What does the room feel like? And does that have a sound, or uh, is there an energy or a rhythm to the scene or this location that we're at? And how might music help to fill out or convey that scene that we might not necessarily see on camera because it
Hmm.
might be a close up, but we might be in a magnificent room.
Right.
So my composer hat is always on, and even when I'm composing, I'm thinking towards the deadlines, and that's my producer head. I'm thinking towards how big is this film? Does it need to be? How big does this moment need to be? And I'm thinking about those conversations I had with the filmmaker early on when I wasn't necessarily the composer yet. We were talking about the casting process and why this actor or actress was the right fit for this role. And I'm already thinking about, uh, I'm reminded of, oh, right, that character is, or that actor brings a serene quality to this, or an innocent quality to that,
Hmm.
and that's how they're different than these other characters. And you might not see that in the script. You might only see it in the audition
Right.
or on set. And
Hmm.
so then I'm thinking about, well, maybe their theme needs to be softer. Uh, and and that might not occur to me, but it's something that it's just an impression that might build over time
Hmm.
when I'm producing. And by the time I get to the composing bit, now I already have that takeaway. Uh,
Right.
so so yeah, they both inform each other, and
Hmm.
you never really take one hat off. They're both always on, and at the same time, uh, as a composer, not all of my music's going to make it in,
Right.
and as a producer, I know why that has to happen. But
Exactly.
as a composer, I'm very attached to my music, and it is a painful process to write something that you love and then not see it make it to the final mix. But that is part of the process.
Hmm.
Not every take gets used by the actors, and not every note of music of mine as the composer is going to make it into the final
That
mix.
is so true. That is so true. What happens to notes or pieces of music that don't make it in? I've always been curious. So, I mean, for yourself, what happens? Is it stay in an archive or as a reference, perhaps, for something else?
Sometimes that if it's really not appropriate for, if it's really not the right stylistic choice for a film, it ends up being inspiration for another one. And
Hmm.
there's a world in where you you see that the scene is only a minute or so long, and you feel like you only began that piece, and you might extend it and build it into something much more developed. And that can only happen if it's essentially not being used, and it's now you see another life for it because it wasn't really meant. It You thought it was going to be used in the film, you thought you were writing for the film, but maybe you're writing for a different story.
Right. And would you say when you're starting to get inspired and you're about to create your music, do you have a particular instrument that you gravitate to, or a tool, or software? How do you prepare?
Sure. Well, one of the things I do in software is I try to create a sound palette.
I see.
And so those are sounds and instruments, software instruments that uh, feel like they belong in this world of this character. And so I create a template so that I can very easily reach for those sounds and activate and leverage the spark of inspiration rather than having to find the sound when I get the idea and having to activate it. And software is a great tool for making fast music, but it also requires setup and it
Right.
requires forethought to get those things in place. So that's one way I start to set up. And then there are those instruments that I just gravitate towards:
Hmm.
guitar, piano, some percussion elements, whether it's an acoustic uh, percussion or it's something electronic. Uh,
Hmm.
the other thing that is always fun to do with the director is coming up with a playlist.
Right.
And they will share a playlist, I will share my playlist, and we see how those tastes commingle, and they're bringing ideas to me that I hadn't thought would make sense. But invariably, the ideas that the directors bring to the table, especially the ones I hadn't thought of, end up making the music much more interesting.
Mm-hmm. It adds
So
more
it's almost
flavor.
like, yeah, and it ends up being it feeling like you're in a band, and you've got the director is kind of like the lead singer, and then I'm the guitarist, or I'm the keyboardist or the drummer, and together we're making that music that collectively we feel like it's telling the story that the director either came up with or is adapting, and then is entrusting with their filmmaking team to help them tell in a much more grander or more developed way than doing
Exactly.
it by themselves.
And when does the orchestration come in once you've had this palette and this collaboration with the filmmaker?
You can start to orchestrate right away if
Mm-hmm.
you are hearing how these parts are layered. So there's no reason now in software, or if you have the musical chops, the musical theory, to write
Mm-hmm.
out those parts and imagine that this harmony is taking place or being constructed with these different instruments where they're playing different lines and different regions of the musical staff. In other cases, you're writing a demo of music, and because of time limitations, you're doing the orchestration once that piece of music has been approved, and you're now thinking about how you're going to develop that further, whether it's with orchestra or it's with live band or it's with electronics. But it's often in those cases where once you know what the melody is and what the tempo is, then you start to supplement it and you start to orchestrate or arrange
Mm-hmm.
different instruments to build it out. And then you're going back and forth with versions of that that are simpler and more intimate, and then there are bigger versions of that which are much more developed and much bigger, much grander, or much more intricate. And it really depends on the scene, but uh, it comes out of that initial idea that you all agree is something that is representative of a feeling in that film, and then you take it to the next level by orchestrating it and adding other colors to the palette.
Interesting. Do you have a preference, or I don't even think this is a fair question, but do you have a preference for live instruments or electronic or a hybrid?
I always love the hybrid because there are things that electronics can do that aren't quite the same with live instrumentation, and then live players are able to bring uh, the the randomness and the the natural quality of uh, people playing together, and they are aligning and syncing along with each other, and also the sound of multiple instruments in a room. There's a blend that happens acoustically that is almost impossible to replicate. And then there's just the idea of having the ideas and the interpretation of your music by another musician,
Mm-hmm.
and being open to how they interpret it. Are they going to play that note differently, softer, harder, faster, slower than you imagined? And is that adding something that you couldn't have thought of? And I that those kinds of surprises is what I love about music, where there are elements to the sound, to the performance that just are constantly evoking surprise or tickling the ear. Uh, so that combination, I like electronics that are somewhat unpredictable,
Yes.
so they're constantly changing or bringing new sounds to the ear. And likewise with musicians, I don't want them to just play the notes I've written. I want them to add some of their humanity, their interpretation to the performance, so that it feels like when you go to an orchestra and you've got one conductor uh, and their interpretation of a piece of music, and then you go to another orchestra, and that other conductor, it's her interpretation of the piece, and they are different. It's the
Yes.
same piece of music, but it feels very different. And
Hmm.
there's one might be uh, more grander, and one might feel like it's much more intimate. Again, same piece of music, completely different interpretation. I love that part
Yes.
of working with live musicians.
Yeah, I think you nailed it for me for sure. At least that's how I feel when I'm
Yeah.
in the presence of live orchestra. So for Ricky or for any of your current projects, how do you keep fresh? How do you continue to evolve in your practice? Do you have artists that you normally kind of go to, or what are some of your
Yeah.
fresh things?
Yeah, I'm constantly listening to new music that is in and out of the film music world.
Right.
I think you can get very locked into an approach or a sound if you're always listening to the same genre or the
Hmm.
same kind of music. So I'm constantly on the hunt for new music. And so ask my collaborators, what are you listening to? What do you like? And I ask my friends that who aren't in music or aren't in film. I ask my son that he's always, introducing me to new music.
Yes.
So it's being having open ears and having the curiosity to hear new work. I was really taken by the score that I heard in the film last night that I saw at Sundance, and that gave me new ideas of,
Hmm.
oh, I didn't think about how that approach would work, and now it's spurring on new ideas, which is a dialogue between creatives by hearing their work and playing them my work, and then hearing what they thought of it and ideas that they're coming up with as a result. So it has to be for me a conversation,
Right.
that conversation is fueled by sharing work, sharing ideas, listening to work that we're all being exposed to. Uh, I love that kind of conversation. One of the big inspirations I had growing up was listening to artists like Jeff Buckley, who I got to see live
Hmm.
multiple times, and you wouldn't think that his music would translate uh, quite so readily into film scores, but there's an intimacy to his work. There's an ability of hearing space, and also there's a delicate quality and an innocence to his music, which certainly translated into, and just to jump back to what we were talking about before,
Hmm.
harp music.
Right.
And so I'm sure that influence is carried over into a lot of the pieces that I've written that you wouldn't think that Jeff Buckley would be an influence, you know, to something I'm writing for orchestra.
Right. I'm gonna have to go remind myself of some of
Right.
that
Yeah.
music, right? Um, is there any, so congratulations on Ricky being at Sundance this year. I
Thank you.
know it's ongoing. This is still a few more screenings and online. What's up for you next, Simon? Anything that you can share in terms of your next project?
Sure. Well, I'm working on a film now called Thoughts and Prayers, and that's a film that we're wrapping this week. So that will be working towards getting that finished later this year, and that's a very exciting project. That harp has a very strong voice
Hmm.
in that story, and then in the score. I've got a handful of other projects that I'm working on. Some that I'm completing right now, and some that I will be embarking on this summer. So it's going to be a busy year. A lot of music, a lot of great collaborations, and then we'll see what happens with Ricky. Hopefully, we get to share that with the world outside of Sundance
That's right.
as a result of this wonderful premiere experience here.
Yes, I've been following online and it looks really great. So again, congratulations. We'll look out
Thank you.
for thoughts and prayers and anything else that you're working on. I'll be sure that people know where to find you. You have a website that has a lot of great info. What a pleasure. Thank you, Simon.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you.